Story 1. One of my neighbors was a creepy guy. He was seen often walking and talking alone on the streets in the middle of the night, and I could not believe he was carrying a machete with him. This guy was crazy. He never felt pain. One time being hit by a car, broke his leg and was worried about his cheese and his cowboy hat, yelled random at things only he could see, and was afraid of his mother in a weird way. He was 40 or something like that. He would do as his mother said, but he wasn't violent. Everyone said his mother made some kind of a deal with the devil because none of them worked but had money, and she sold his soul for this deal. He was in his world, walking and mumbling random things, talking about death and angels. His mother died unexplained 2 years ago. She was fine on the same day after he yelled on the street and someone called the ambulance. She passed on her bed with an expression of fear, and her eyes showed pure shock. He crying uncontrollably, asking who would stop the devil that was coming after him. After they buried his mother, he disappeared without a track. It's kinda hard to not see him because he was a 190, 80 kilo full muscles guy. But no one has seen him, and I'm not sure what to believe. He always scared me, but never did something to even approach me. A few times only saying hi, because we lived on the same street. Recently, if I understood correctly, someone found his machete in the cemetery, but I don't know if it's true. Also, his house is still empty because it's his property. And I'm not sure how the law works because he wasn't declared mentally ill, so he had all the rights on it. From time to time, you can still see a light in the attic, but no movement. I'm really curious about what happened to him and where is he now. I had to call my mother about this one because I didn't know the details. It happened when I was young and not gonna lie. Left a small mark on me, and I'm afraid of this respective house. I had an insanely violent neighbor, and he had a small farm with a few cows, pigs, and some chickens, so naturally, he had helpers around the house with his wife. He always loved to terrorize kids, and it was awful because he lived across the street, always being extremely mean with my brother, like picking him up by his ears or grabbing his nose and shutting his mouth all in the middle of the day. There were lots of complaints on his name, but nothing happened until 2015-2016 when he beat a neighbor after a dispute. He kidnapped him somehow, tied him in a hay pile, beat him for a few hours, and after that left him on the street where was found and taken to the hospital. His wife, blesses her heart, was a sweet lady who would always try to stop him and always blamed the cursed land, referring to their house, which everyone in my city believes is full of demonic stuff, because he was a nice guy before moving there. My neighbor, the one who was beaten, dropped the charges. Nobody knows why. He was cruel with his workers and was seen often beating them as well, but usually took people without a family or house so they didn't leave. Around 2017, his workers started to disappear, getting new ones every few weeks, and everyone started to wonder what was happening until one day, when one was found dead a few streets away. And when the police showed up, they found on his property around 8 bodies. It was a short chase, was arrested, in court. His wife declared he was influenced by the house, and the judges declared he was mentally ill but still had to face charges. From June 2017, he was in prison until last year when he was out due to some medical condition, I think. His wife never sold the house, just refused to come around, sold all the animals, made a religious funeral for those who were killed by her husband, and moved to a forest close to our city. That house is one of a hell one. You can hear whispers coming from that house even if no one lives there anymore. One time I tried to look over the fence because I heard lots of noise from there, but didn't see anything. One time someone tried to enter and steal from there. Everything was still there, even the jewelry and all the furniture and home appliances, all of them high quality, and they just ran outside screaming. Something attacked it. I still talk with the sweet lady from time to time, and she's saying how that house was cursed and is protected by evil things and soon will need blood. And that's why her husband was doing those crimes. I've seen her husband as well. He looks almost dead because of his illness, but both of them are happy because they have escaped from the hell house. Even birds are avoiding this place and no one ever tried to enter. Sorry for such a long text, but this one was the most interesting. Keep in mind, I'm skeptical about it. I truly believe the couple has lots of problems, but the house is still creepy, and I'm afraid to come home late at night alone because I always feel like someone is watching me. The wife still comes every month to make sure no one tries to live there for their safety. Story 2, I don't live there anymore, but the house next to the one where I grew up had some weird stories about it. It was abandoned and run down, but still had patio furniture in the back of the house, so it looked abandoned in a hurry. our old neighbor on the other side of our house, said she knew the family that used to live there. She told us this story about how, one night at around 2 a.m., the family's daughter showed up at her door crying. The daughter was crying about how they had to leave that night and came to say goodbye. My neighbor said she saw them leave carrying garbage bags into their car, trying to take all they could. They left that night and never came back. Maybe a year after hearing this, I and my friend were playing catch in the backyard. He threw the ball over the fence of the creepy house, so I went to go get it. And it was just a normal fence that divided the properties. You could go around it. I went around it and grabbed the football, and I looked up at the second floor window, and I swear I saw a woman looking out the window. I ran back to my house as fast as I fucking could. Now, looking back on it, the woman was probably just a squatter, or maybe just a teenager with her that broke in with her friends looking for a place to smoke. But it still freaked me the fuck out. Story 3. Over the heath, there was an ancient crumbling waterhouse where the entire estate's water system was managed. Believe me, we thought it was a miracle how anything that old and manky could keep and pump out any water, but it did. It was made with bricks, with a black slate roof and iron doors, although at the time of this incident it was just a shadow of its former self and didn't have any doors. The windows were all smashed in by generations of kids throwing rocks and stones at them. It was there where my mama and her siblings were kids playing over the heath, and they all told us it. Spooked them and their mates as it did us. It was a really hot day one summer, in the school holidays. The older boys were at home for some reason, and all the younger cousins, me included, were being little brats, so the boys said they would take us all blackberry picking to keep us quiet. Mama agreed gratefully. The boys were responsible and mature at 16, 17, and 18. They babysat for us younger kids all the time. So we all knew the rules of staying close to the boys and doing what they told us. And so, a half hour later, everyone had their fruit buckets and we were off. There were 5 of us younger kids. We were all excited, as blackberry picking was a great family favorite activity, and our Gran's blackberry pies were the best. Gran's house led directly onto the back of the heath. There was a fence with a gap at the end. One of my older cousins passed me through to the other, and then lifted my tiny wheelchair over the fence. The other kids were through in seconds, and we were away again. On our way to our destination, the older boys told us spooky stories, as they always did, half because they liked scaring us, and half because we all used to beg them to. There was nothing more terrifying than a story from my cousins H or B. They were masters and so believable. We loved it. We all stopped talking when we came to the waterhouse. Nobody ever dared to speak around or near the waterhouse, not even the older boys. For something so mundane, it always looked, and still does, so eerie. There was a second fence to get through before we reached our beloved blackberry field, but this time, as we squeezed through the gap of the fence, we were all more somber, as we remembered the old wives' tale urban legend that we all knew about the waterhouse. The story goes, once in the early 1960s, there was a gang of bank robbers. They were local to the area, and were nasty pieces of work. Their expertise was terrorizing bank customers and staff alike before grabbing and shooting anything that moved. They did several jobs without getting caught, but they really messed up a particular job, and a sweet 19-year-old trainee bank clerk was shot dead, and 5 more people were seriously injured. One of the gang was also shot dead, along with the nastiest member of the gang, being seriously wounded in the crossfire. It is said that the remaining gang members escaped with just a few hundred and made their way over to the heath and hid out in the waterhouse. It was newish at that time and was a perfect hideaway for the murderers. There was a lot of contention and stress between the remaining gang, and months, although it was never proven how, the bodies of all 3 of the remaining gang members were discovered rotting away in the waterhouse 6 months later, a few years after the weird stuff and creepy noises started occurring near and around the waterhouse. Mysterious hairy figures were glimpsed, moving stealthily amongst the pipes and wires. A dank, moldy, rotten smell like aging river weeds was always smelt around the area of the waterhouse. And eerie wails and menacing murmurs could be heard day and night. In the late 70s, there was a spate of mysterious deaths of homeless people who would shelter over the heath not too far from the waterhouse. There was nothing to ever link the deaths to the waterhouse, but the locals soon started giving the waterhouse and surrounding area a wide berth because of the creepy history and dark reputation, and that left the waterhouse abandoned and in disrepair. That's what we knew of the Waterhouse's dark history. That is why we were so wary and anxious to get away from it as quickly as possible. When we were all through the gap in the fence further away from the Waterhouse, we younger cousins built up enough courage to glance over at the building of ill repute before being rounded up by the older boys. They put me in my wheelchair again, and we set off to the blackberry field. We soon arrived at the field where some other local kids we knew were already there, and we spent a nice afternoon picking and eating the juicy sweet blackberries and splashing in the river. Soon the sun was getting low and it was time for home. Our journey home was much like the one there. We were still bantering and laughing, and the older boys were still winding us up slightly. But being as it was getting later, we were feeling wearier and slightly subdued. When we reached the fence before the Waterhouse, the air felt slightly too close, like before a thunderstorm. The youngest of the 3 older boys got me out of my wheelchair so that B could lift it over the fence. The other kids were already on the other side of the fence with H and B. A suddenly said to his brother in a low, guarded voice, "Something moved at the back of there, Bruve." B just looked at him sideways. Out of the boys, A was the most likely one to pull a stunt or wind anyone up for a laugh. But A was straight-faced. A said, "I'm going to have a look," passing me through to B and squeezing past us all. "Wait up, A. We've got to..." Having put me in my wheelchair, B had moved forward towards his brother when we all heard a shriek out in horror and disgust, and the 2 boys moved back quickly. H, having already taken me out of my wheelchair again, had told everyone to run. And we did. B picking up my tiny wheelchair and folding it up while running. A grabbing the other 2 kids' hands and following. B and H running with me on his shoulders, holding my other cousin's hands. We ran and ran. They kept saying, "Don't look back, don't look back." I did, but saw nothing. We didn't stop till we got to the fence which led back to the road on the estate, and we could see civilization again. We were all completely exhausted, especially the older boys. Before we slipped through the fence to the road, B, holding himself up by the railings, asked, "What did you see, A?" Y, yellow eyes. H, hairy face. All of us younger kids began to panic and scream, and H had to calm us all down. He said that we were safe and it would be all right, but we all wanted to get as far away from the Waterhouse as possible. When we got home, we all looked bedraggled and slightly nervy. Mama and my auntie noticed this and asked the boys what was wrong. H just said that we just got spooked by an old drunk man in the bushes looking for golf balls to sell. And as that was quite commonplace over the heath, Mama and my auntie just gave us kids a pep talk and hugged us. We never did tell my mama or my auntie the truth about the yellow eyes and hairy face, or find out what it was. But we kids didn't go near the Waterhouse for a long time after. Story 4. In the Western Ghats of Maharashtra, this story starts with a pizza delivery boy who lives on the other side of the Ghat and has to travel to and fro every day for his job. Many times he would have to work till late, like on festivals, holidays, weekends, etc. Once, when he was returning home late at night, around 1 a.m., and saw a lady with a baby in her arms standing on the side of the road, he got confused as it was so late and asked if he could help. She said yes, and he dropped her at the end of the Ghat. Remember, the Ghat has almost no lights. This kept happening every time he traveled around that time. One day, the same thing repeated, but this time the baby was crying too hard. This particular day, he decided to ask the lady what is her problem and why she was there at this time. The baby was crying in the background. She did not answer any of his questions and remained quiet. Then, to change the topic, the guy said that the baby is crying a lot. Is it hungry? Is it hurt? This is so annoying and stuff. For some reason, she got so angry that after hearing his comments, she threw the baby down the hill from the road. The guy was too stunned. He started getting scared. He did not know what to do. He told her to get off. He didn't ask a single question. Now he just wanted to leave ASAP. The lady did get off his bike, but as soon as he started to go, she ran furiously behind him. It is said that the next day the guy was nowhere to be found. People did find his bike, but not him. It is also said that the Atma, or soul of the baby, still roams around there, and crying noises can be heard at around that time. Many truck drivers also reported similar cases. Creepy. Story 5. Where I grew up, there was this empty house for sale for what had to have been at least 10-12 years. Got sold, finally, and then put up for sale again within weeks. This was back in the 80s, 90s. I would ask my stepdad why the house never seemed to be sold or stay sold. It was a nicely maintained outside appearance house, he said, probably asking way too much for it. At the time, I accepted that answer. Then once I was an adult, I started to realize just how odd and impractical that would have been. I mean, I know that happens, but for that long? And then when someone does buy, they immediately sell it again? It didn't add up, so one of the next times I was back in the area visiting, I asked around a little about the house as it had been torn down at some point. Everyone I asked stated that the house was incredibly haunted, to the point that when anyone would even tour the house to buy it, I guess stuff would happen and people would just leave. Now, from what I can recall, there were plenty of times I would drive by that house when I was in HS and random lights would be turned on in that house. I always assumed that someone either broke in or someone would leave lights on to keep folks from breaking in. No clue what the actual truth is about the house, but I do know that there were never any other stories about anything else in that town being haunted. And that house was maybe built in the late 60s, 70s, so the house wasn't even that old when all of that was going on, so who knows? Story 6. Scottish settlement that imported sheep and persuaded at least 14 families from the old country to undertake an exciting new adventure. They came over in 1804 optimistic about the future, but were soon greeted to find the reality of a swampy piece of land just in time for malaria season. The settlement got off to a rough start. The low-lying swamps were difficult to cultivate, and agricultural output was dismal. Their sheep weren't thriving as they did back home, and soon disease spread. They tried to raise extra funds and fix the problems, but it never worked out. After the colony was invaded by other settlers in 1812, most of the original settlers left and the founder sold his property. Some original Highlanders remained, and they were soon joined by others who were interested in making the land more usable. However, this was just the beginning of their troubles. The first incident happened to some of the women while they were prepping straw in the barn. Without any warning, the poles from the roof structure started to fall, sending deadly wooden daggers to the ground. The woman had to run to avoid being impaled. They investigated and couldn't find any reason why this happened. Then, paranormal events started happening. Unexplained sounds started during the night. They heard footsteps throughout the house. And it wasn't just the occasional creak or soft shuffle. According to many family members, it sounded like the rhythmic marching of men preparing for war. When the family went to investigate, the noises would abruptly stop, and they couldn't see anyone around. While a baby was sitting in a wooden crate, it suddenly started to rock violently from side to side. 3 men rushed over to stop the crate, and although they used every ounce of strength, they could not stop the crate. It was as if it was being forced by an unseen hand. They removed the baby and the crate continued to rock back and forth when the men backed away in terror. Then fires started. Over 12 fires were put out on the property without any signs of anything starting them. As one fire was put out, another one would pop back up in its place. They were troubled and now certain that something or someone was trying to drive them away from the farmhouses. There are many accounts of these events happening year after year. The most common incident reported were rocks and bullets being propelled at the exterior of their houses. They would collect the rocks and bullets and leave unique markings on them. They were brought off of the property and put in nearby creeks. Only a few days later would the same bullets and rocks with the unique markings come back. These stories started to spread about the property, and curious newspapers began picking up the stories and investigating. Eventually, people started traveling to see the settlement. The families who lived there finally got tired of the constant harassment from unseen forces, and now tourism and noisy people. Local folklore experts and some teachers started coming to give them the advice to get rid of their ghost problems. One suggested that they needed to shoot a black goose with a silver bullet because the curse was put on their property by a woman who lived nearby, so they tried it. They were told that this woman originally wanted to purchase the land, but they wouldn't let her because she was a woman, so she had been doing this to get revenge. They performed the ritual with the goose. They took a silver bullet and shot the black goose in the wing. Shortly after, they saw the woman with her arm in a sling. After that, all of the events stopped and they had peace for many years. One day, the woman whom they suspected passed away. She grew old and passed with her 3 sons by her side. The same day, ironically, the settlement caught fire and burned down. For 200 years, this story has been told, and it is still a tourist location to this day. A lot of the locals suspect that all of these events happened because it is so close to a native reserve that the Ojibwe wanted the land and tried to drive the settlers out by scaring them away. Story 7. Clarita Villanueva, a 17-year-old Filipino girl, had known a life of tragedy. She did not remember her father. She did not know if he had died or had deserted her mother. Her mother was a fortune teller by vocation. The girl was brought up watching her mother holding seances, communicating with the dead, and using clairvoyance to predict to people what they could expect in the future. Her mother took money from people for her services and then laughed at them behind their backs. To her it was all just a game, a means of making a living by duping unsuspecting and gullible people. When Clarita was 12 years old, her mother died. Since she did not have any immediate family to take her in and care for her, she turned to prostitution for survival. At 18, she moved to Manila with her boyfriend, but found out that he was already married, so she began working as an exotic dancer. The big city was a hiding place, a center of money and vice for her business. But one morning at 2 a.m. on the streets of downtown Manila, Clarita was picked up by the police, who suspected her of being a vagrant of homeless. The policeman called for a vehicle, and Clarita was taken to the ancient Bilibid prison, used as the city jail. Bilibid has been a prison for over 300 years. It was built by the Spanish and used by the Americans, the Filipinos, and the Japanese as a prison and a place of torment. 2 days after Clarita was incarcerated, there struck the strangest phenomenon to ever hit Bilibid prison in its 300-year history. This young woman was bitten severely on her body by unseen and unknown alien entities. She claimed there were two of them, a huge monster-like spirit and a smaller one. They sunk their fangs and teeth deep into her flesh, making deep indentations. They would bite her neck, back, legs, and arms simultaneously. Blood flowed, mostly underneath her skin from the bites. The 18-year-old girl screamed in horror and fainted. The guards and medics heard the commotion and came running to the women's division of the prison. The other female inmates pointed to the writhing, tormented girl on a cot. The girl was taken to the prison hospital for observation and treatment, where all the doctors declared that they had never seen anything like it. These strange demonic bitings began to occur daily, baffling all who saw it. Dr. Mariano Lara, the chief medical examiner at the prison, appealed for help through the media and permitted many to view the strange phenomenon. Filipino, Chinese, and American doctors, university professors, and other professionals were called in to analyze the situation. After 3 awful weeks of this torture, a radio reporter came to Bilibid and taped a session while the doctors were violently struggling with Clarita. The reporter immediately released his story on a local radio station just after the 10 o'clock news. The news media soon caught wind of the occurrence and sent more reporters out to investigate. The newspapers, radio stations, and magazines found it their kind of story and began to publicize it. Even the cartoonists were soon drawing pictures of the entities from Clarita's descriptions as the beatings continued day by day. The UPI and other world news services began to report the phenomenon worldwide. This incident made the front page of many newspapers: Switzerland, France, Germany, England, Canada, even the United States. One doctor accused the girl of putting on an act in order only to get publicity. Clarita gazed at the doctor and said, "You will die." He didn't feel anything at the moment, but the following day the doctor expired without even getting sick. He simply died. Fear struck the city when that news was spread about. The girl was not only a harlot, they said. She was also a witch who could speak curses upon human beings and they would die. The chief jailer had a confrontation with the girl. He had kicked her for something she had done wrong while rebelling against him. Clarita looked at the jailer in cold, inhuman hate and said, "You will die." Within 4 days, the man was dead and buried, the second person to fall victim to her curse. Dr. Lara and his medical staff were deeply concerned. They had a prisoner who certainly was not crazy, but who was being wildly attacked by unseen entities and being bitten deeply on all parts of her body by creatures none else could see. They were afraid that this thing would kill them, as it had the 2 others who dared cross it. It was their responsibility to do something for the girl. Yet they had no earthly idea what to do about the situation. It was beyond their medical knowledge. Who were these alien entities? The large one, Clarita said, was a monster in size. He was black and very hairy. He had fangs that came down on each side of his mouth, plus a set of buck teeth all the way around. The doctors verified her description by the teeth marks on her body, buck teeth solid, all the way around the bite, rather than sharp teeth in the front. The smaller entity was almost like a dwarf, He would climb up her body to bite her upper torso. Both of these spirits liked to bite her where there was a lot of flesh, like the back of her leg, the back of her neck, and the fleshy part of her upper arms. They would bite deep into her, leaving ugly, painful bruises. Dr. Lara and his assistants called in all sorts of observers, medical doctors, surgeons, psychiatrists, and professors from the Far East University and the University of Santo Tomas. They claimed they saw bite marks appear out of nowhere on Clarita's arms. Dr. Lara also described the bite marks as otherworldly because they were too large and round. A human bite is elliptical and seemed to have been made by molars. No one had ever witnessed such strange and demonic behavior, nor did they know any solution to the problem. They all wondered who would be the next victim of her cursey. Dr. Lara and his staff sent out word globally, "Come and help us, please help us." In the end, hopelessness urged them to finally resort to exorcism. Reverend Lester Sumrall heeded the call. Because I was a foreigner in the Philippines, I went to the mayor's office and asked permission to see Clarita. He granted me his permission but warned me that several people had been injured by the girl and that 2 had been cursed and were dead. I went with the understanding that I would not sue the government if I was hurt and that I would not complain if mistreated. When I arrived at the prison, the head doctor of 6 physicians, Dr. Lara, was skeptical of this foreign minister, but he finally permitted me to see the girl. Clarita was brought into a special room where the Reverend was waiting with a large group of news reporters, foreign members of the press, university professors, and medical doctors who had been invited by Dr. Lara. As Clarita was being led into the room, she looked at them and said nothing, but when she saw Reverend Sumrall, she screamed violently, "I hate you." That was the beginning of the confrontation. There was a raging battle with the girl blaspheming God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Spirit. Her eyes were burning coals of fire and full of hate. I commanded the evil spirit to lose her. After a 3-day confrontation with the devil in her, the miracle of God came upon her. She relaxed, smiled, and said, "He's gone," indicating that the thing went out the window.